the 49ers Dolphins is like the matchup that like we've been talking about like all year. Like we've been talking about this Dolphins offense and how fun it has been and what has made it fun. We've been talking about the 49ers offense and how it's changed up and how the Christian McCaffrey thing has changed all of that. So we have these two teams going against each other. And it easily like it seems like it should be the most fun game of the week and just how these teams are going to be going against each other. Yet especially when you look at like what the Dolphins offense is against this 49ers defense. We've talked about the 49ers defense a lot, and like they are just so good at protecting the middle of the field. I wrote way earlier in the season, just kind of about how really no defense asks more about from their linebackers than the 49ers do. And Fred Warner is a big part of that. He's playing so well. He's my first team midseason all pro. It keeps going. He'll be on my full season all pro for linebacker. He's just so good at protecting the middle of the field. And when he's on the field, teams just don't throw there. But that is what the entire Dolphins offense is made up of, is these throws to the middle of the field, to the intermediate area. And they're so good at hitting those quicker than really any other offense in the league. So the dynamic between like what this offense and that defense is going to do is going to be just a lot of fun to watch to start.
Yeah, I mean, we were all summer. We were talking about the Dolphins, the roster construction, and how happy we were, and we're happy with the results. But this is kind of what we've been honing in on for a couple weeks here, as kind of like the litmus test game, right, for the Dolphins. Like, I mean, since Tua has come back, I mean, I wrote about it in Worksheet. The best team they faced from a pass defense stance is 22nd in the NFL. So this is kind of a big jump. On the other hand, too, like it kind of, like I said, it works as a two-way street. Like this 49ers defense we know is inherently good, but the only like really legitimate offense that they faced outside of the Seahawks in week 2 has been the Chiefs, and the Chiefs kind of went up and down the field on them. So this is kind of what wins out here, right? Like the Miami offense versus the 49ers defense. It's funny that the Dolphins kind of get thought of as like almost like the mini 49ers because of the, Mike McDaniel, but they're doing it in different ways than like the 49ers offense. Like, like you said, that quick passing game, it's not all predicated on yak like the 49ers are. They're pushing the ball downfield more than like the 49ers offense does and has. So I'm very curious to see kind of what wins out in this game. Like you said, it's kind of like the styles makes fight we talk about. Like I'm very curious to see like who pushes who off of kind of their game. The Dolphins offense versus the Niners defense are inversely. But yeah, I've been ready for the Dolphins to have a legitimate defensive test. Like, I mean, this run the past month, like they're playing teams like the Texans, the Browns, the Bears, the Lions. Like this is it. Put some meat on the bone here.
Yeah, it's just it's weird because it's one of those things where like it is a good defense that they're playing against, but kind of as you mentioned, the 49ers defense hasn't been as good as it had been earlier in the season when we were talking about them as like legitimately one of the best defenses in the league. And some injuries have played a part in that, but the overall quality hasn't been at the tippy top of like what we've seen. And it's just so interesting because like what we're seeing and what we're going to be looking for is like the really good pieces of the 49ers defense. And like Warner is going to be, I think, the biggest part, obviously, because it's like that middle part of the field, because the corners you're not completely worried about, right? Like, are they going to play a lot of zone? You're probably not going to man up against the Dolphins because because you don't. But when these teams are in zone, like that's where Tua is incredible, right? Because they're always throwing to a spot and it's so quick and it's hitting. So you're not really worried about the corner. So a lot of it is going to be how that middle of the field is, you're going to have Warner there. You're going to have Hufanga there probably. So you're probably going to be looking at a little bit of just how they mix and match how they plug up, that middle of the field. And that's where the Niners are really good, but also along that defensive line, right? You have Nick Bosa, who's probably, if not the defensive player of the year, he's probably going to be like number 2 behind Micah Parsons. But then you look at, we have Teron Armstead, who may or may not play. And I know there's been a lot of like going around of Dolphins like pressure rate without Armstead on the field. But most of that also happened earlier in the season with Teddy Bridgewater and Skylar Thompson. So I think you look at what Tua can do, and it's going to be a lot, but the way he's getting the ball out, and we continue to harp on this, is just it can kind of mitigate what Nick Bosa can do, right? Because he's not going to be standing back there. They're not going to be long developing plays. So if you obviously would rather have Teron Armstead on the field, but it's not like he's going to be doing something. And I know like Tua took a couple sacks once he was out of the game against Houston, but Miami was also just kind of like messing around with the Texans, right? Because not that they didn't care, but like there was that clip going around where Mike McDaniel was mic'd up, and he was like, tell me if I'm crazy. Like, and he said this on the side, tell me if I'm crazy, but like, I think I'm just going to pass on every play on this drive. And like, that's how the Dolphins went into that game against the Texans. Like and they were screwing around in empty, like they did more empty, looks than they had in any other game. They were just trying to like see what worked, because they were like getting ready to see what they're going to continue to be doing like for the rest of the season. So I'm not overly concerned. Obviously, you would rather have Teron Armstead against Nick Bosa if you're the Dolphins, but I don't think it's going to be this thing where like Nick Bosa is just like wrecking this offense, and the offense isn't going to be able to do anything because they don't have a left tackle. Like the way they play right now has all season long has been like this Dolphins offensive line as a whole is still not good, right?
No.
It's better than it was, but
It's the worst
because of
unit on the field in this
yeah,
game.
easily.
With
But
Teron Armstead.
yes, but because of how quickly Tua has been able to get rid of the ball, how they're still pushing the ball down the field, he's releasing the ball under 2.5 seconds on average, still has like a 9 A dot, and that's just kind of unheard of, right? Like we go back to like the Brady thing. That was also like a Carson Palmer thing. I was looking at seasons where like that has happened with that low of a time to throw and like an A dot over 9, and Carson Palmer has like 4 of those seasons. So it's still a very like a vertical offense that's able to hit there. So I'm not totally sold that like that's going to be one of the biggest factors in this game. And then I think on the other side of the ball, it's going to be very interesting because we do have slightly the same types of structure of offense, and both of these teams like want to get in 21 personnel. The way they do it is very different though, but it's interesting that when the 49ers are in 21, and we've kind of talked about it a whole bunch, and they use the Kyle Juszczyk, right? They want to get you in base, and Miami right now is a team that like does not live in base a lot, but when they see 21 personnel, and they've seen it on 78 plays, and a lot of it was against Baltimore, but a lot of it was also this past game against Houston, Chicago, Minnesota, Buffalo. Like there are teams that have been running out 21 personnel against them. They have gone into base on 98.7% of those plays, and they just don't really have the linebackers to be doing that. And that's against teams that don't really have the same type of versatility in 21 personnel as the 49ers do, and they are 30th in EPA per play on defense against 21. So that's definitely going to be a place where I think that the 49ers really heavily go into that and try to manipulate a lot of what the Dolphins defense does. And I think that's probably going to slow down that pass rush a little bit. That's been getting just a little better since Bradley Chubb came in. Taking off their defensive backs, which I think some of their defensive backs are the best parts of that defense. So I think that's a place where even if it's not in the run game, it's still in they can spread them out in the passing game. I think that's probably going to be the biggest concern for the Dolphins in this game, is how the 49ers are able to kind of manipulate some of that personnel and make the Dolphins play in a defensive package that they're not very strong with.
Yeah, I think when you hit it on next, so the stuff I was looking at too, yeah, like teams that absolutely just flooded the Miami Dolphins, the Ravens, and the Bears. They couldn't stop the Bears in that game. They got some second half stops, and it's like, man, they're going to see so much of that stuff, but from better players. And when you look at, if you just look at kind of the 4 units in this game, offense, defenses, by far the weakest link here is the Miami defense. of the four units. You figure
Right.
offense for offense, defense for defense. This Miami defense is by far the softest. They're very mid pack. In terms of like DVOA, they're bad against quarterback play. They play a ton of man coverage, and Jimmy Garoppolo has been really good against man coverage, a little softer against zone. The 49ers have a bunch of players that are good against man coverage too. So it's like, yeah, they're going to get a lot of that stuff like the Ravens and Bears are doing, but just way out a more optimum, like in terms of personnel. So that's what I kind of keep coming back to is like, can this Dolphins defense come away with enough stops? The Saints were able to do. I mean, the Saints kind of showed up last week against the 49ers. I don't know if it was kind of a look ahead game, kind of felt like a little trappy for the 49ers. And they kind of let the Saints hang around. If Andy Dalton was able to punch in some of those red zone possessions, maybe that was the outcome of that game could have been a little different. But it felt like they kind of sleptwalked through that New Orleans game a little bit last week.
Yeah, a little bit, and I think it kind of came through with McCaffrey ended up not 100%. Some of those running backs weren't 100%. So, that is part of it. But McCaffrey expected to play and it'd be okay. It seemed like he said he was lucky and it did not suffer a serious injury in that game. So he's been practicing this week, expected to play, and that'll be big. And it might
We're
be.
gonna see some Tevin Coleman and some
Well,
Tyrion Davis Price.
so that was where I was going because we kind of talked about how because of how good the 49ers had been and some of their depth at running back that McCaffrey didn't have to take on like the 98% workload that he had in Carolina. But this might be a game where he does have to do that because you're probably going to need that type. You're probably not going to get the luxury of like running out the end of the game with a Davis Price like you were the past couple weeks with like Elijah Mitchell. And I think that transforms the 49ers offense a little bit and what they have to do and how often McCaffrey will have to be on the field. But I think that also plays into their advantage because, like you said, they can do so many different things in the types of personnel. We had a Jawan Jennings game a little bit. Like
Yeah.
it's the fun thing about the 49ers is they have so many different ways to beat you. And so if they need to come out in 11, we talked about it during their playoff run where they really leaned into 11, but you still have Jawan Jennings is not like a number 3 wide receiver that you would really think of that type of quality. Like he plays like a big tight end. So when they're in 11, it still plays like 12. When they're in 21, it can play like 11. Like it's just the ways they come out. And I'm not sure if the 49ers I'm not sure if the Dolphins have enough bodies and versatility along their defense that's going to hold up with that. So like that's going to be the most fascinating part, I think, because I think like we kind of know what the Dolphins offense versus the 49ers defense is going to look like and the strength versus strength there. But I think that the real interesting part, and I think what really swings this game is how well the Dolphins defense can really hold on to all of the different looks that the 49ers offense is going to bring. And I think like that's going to be the differentiating key of like how close this game is going to be.
Yeah, 100%. It should be pass heavy script too for both teams. I mean, both these run defenses are pretty good.
Yeah.
So it should be a situation where we actually see a lot of passing too in this game, where you would think like, oh, Shanahan versus Mike McDaniel would be a lot of right. Listen, the Dolphins are a bad running team offensively.
Yeah.
I mean, it was cool when you were running on the Bears and the Browns, but they're not a good running team, and the 49ers are awesome against the run. The Dolphins defense, actually, one of the things they do well is they have been good up front against these running back runs, and even McCaffrey, the carries he's had since joining the 49ers hasn't been hyper efficient. So I think this could be fun, man. I think this game could get there. I've seen a lot of people in on the under. I think it could be more of a shootout than expected.
Yeah, I think I might lean there too, and it's also going to be one of those things like how we know both of these offenses, they're not so much established the run type plays, right? But they want all of their plays to look the same. And that's what the Shanahan offense has been so often. That's what the McDaniel thing is. So like also we're going to see like probably a lot of play action, but both of these quarterbacks so far have been like really good without play action too. So it's just there's so many different layers, and okay, we could probably go into that and talk about this game alone for like an hour on the podcast, but we shouldn't do that. But it's definitely probably the matchup I've been most looking forward to